Hello, my name is Nichole Delaney, and I'm a student at the University of North Texas. I will be presenting my research final for the class 4307, and I'm going to be examining SharePoint in the context of the business, the Heritage House of Keller. But I'll go more into specifics on that later. So to start out the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about knowledge management and SharePoint. So knowledge management can be defined as the deliberate and systematic coordination of an organization's people, technology, processes, and the organizational structure in order to add value through reuse and innovation. And then just to give you a little bit about SharePoint, it has the functionality to incorporate taxonomy into document libraries and lists. This allows users to access it in search by filtering or clicking on terms. It can also be utilized in document management, customer extranets, knowledge bases, web content management sites, business reporting tools, and many other cases. Files can also be stored in the document library, and it's really nice because SharePoint is designed to work seamlessly with Microsoft Office. So that means if like an organization or a business already has that foundation in place, it'll be a lot easier to go ahead and incorporate that into the organization structure. So just more about SharePoint. It also has different tools, like you can access a calendar, survey tools, workflow tools, announcements, discussion, and blog tools, and that's all presented in a really nice central hub. This can be especially useful in tracking issues and different management projects for all of the users. Also, the versatility of SharePoint and the smooth integration with other Microsoft components it makes it an excellent knowledge management tool for organization, and that can be both large and small. So it can accommodate businesses of all sizes. Also, it provides an integrated portal platform that, like I said, combines document management tools with Web 2.0 communication and collaboration features. So now we're going to take a look at the organization, which is the Heritage House of Keller. So first I'm going to start out with just a little bit about the business. It's a skilled nursing facility that has about 50 employees. And of those 50 employees, they have 7 department heads that are responsible for overseeing the facility from a business and a medical perspective. So this is going to be like the head of nursing, it'll have admissions, it'll work with physical therapy. So there are kind of the designated leaders of the building already, which is nice in terms of looking at the integration. However, it is important to point out that the organization uses very minimal technology and really heavily relies on just a few employees that have been with the company for a while. And they risk losing knowledge as these employees are growing near to retirement, and they have no infrastructure that is in place to try to capture any of it. So the company is really looking for a platform to help facilitate collaboration and the organization of documents, and then just for tools for completing group projects that may need to happen. So first we're going to look at a study done by Gambalo and Mearns in 2019. And this study really helps to highlight the need for a focus on usability and training when implementing SharePoint. So overall, the study found that Microsoft SharePoint was significant in enabling an organization to efficiently share knowledge on projects and businesses as a whole. The opportunities that were presented in this for their organization looked at the organization being able to cut down on wasted time doing unnecessary tasks, like having to go to different stores to collect performance reports, and it acted as a tool for collaboration on various documents and content. They also found that the platform allowed an organization to develop schedules and improve communication and feedbacks on projects. This can be especially useful. However, there were some challenges that were presented with the integration of SharePoint. One of those being that there were issues surrounding the usability of the system and the perception of usability from the users. They also found that getting the users to understand how valuable the platform can be in terms of being more efficient in collaboration and sharing knowledge through the platform was a struggle. And they also found that SharePoint is sometimes too complex and does not accommodate users' skills at all levels, and especially if the right training is not given. Just some more about the study. Some more issues. They found that to combat the usability issues, they found that user resistance, it was imperative to develop individual strategies on how to use SharePoint through a framework better. These strategies were necessary to avoid having the system simply as like an information repository, ignoring many functionalities of the system. So just people using the site incorrectly and not what it's for. And then it also highlighted some key issues surrounding the implementation of the SharePoint system, if it was not carried out strategically with the specifics of the organization in mind. And then looking at it through the context of the Heritage House of Keller, this study was important because there are department heads that are uncomfortable operating with the technology currently residing in the facility, which is very minimal. So introducing SharePoint could present challenges surrounding the usability of a new system. And then usability is a challenge, like I said, so it'll be extremely important to consider that if the technology is not compatible or there isn't enough training, the implementation of SharePoint could be especially tricky. And then another thing to consider was the organizational culture. Considering most of the staff are over the age of 45 and do not like changes, especially in technology, this could be something that would really have to be considered, and it would need to be carried out very strategically. Overall, this study highlighted that usability and training are important aspects that are going to need to be considered in the Heritage House of Keller. And then it does highlight that if SharePoint isn't user-friendly, then it won't meet the organizational processes, and it won't evolve to meet the processes. Because if people don't want to use the framework or they don't want to use the new system, it would just be a waste. Okay, so then another study is by Madalaka and Pretorius in 2016. The study highlights the necessity to consider technological factors and management. So this was done in a cross-sectional case study, and they actually utilized data collected from the South African universities. And this was in the form of online questionnaires that were pointed towards the usage of SharePoint across the different departments at the university. So these questionnaires focused on what they felt was the perceived usefulness, the perceived ease of use, along with behavioral intentions to use and actual system use. So opportunities they found where they believed SharePoint was capable of enhancing workflows in the business processes, as well as making storage access, retrieval, and uploading of shared documents easier and more convenient. They also believe that SharePoint is a key to institutions improving daily operations, especially in the institutions of higher learning. They found, however, there were some challenges, and those were heavily in technological and institutional factors. These included the ease of use of SharePoint, and how it was supported by management, and then how it was introduced through training and organization, and also predict adoption and use. So they implemented management strategies to try to combat this, and they found that by doing extra training by department, it actually helped to encourage a better cultural attitude within the organization. They did find a lack of awareness about SharePoint through the questionnaire around the different departments, but to combat that, they created awareness campaigns around the campus. Just more about the study. In terms of through the Heritage House of Keller, it is important to know that the Heritage House of Keller has had issues surrounding poor management. The administrator is known for being callous and arduous with the staff. So this presents a challenge with implementing SharePoint. Just like in the study pointed out that management was a driving force, it would need to be extensive time to implement workshops to try to counter out the issues with management, which would probably benefit the organizational culture in the process. Overall, the study did highlight that having management on board is, of course, an integral part of the system, along with leadership skills that are necessary to help guide the implementation and the attitude around the implementation. Because obviously, if a manager or, in our case, the administrator doesn't want the change or is resisting it, that's going to funnel down through the employees. Another thing that it kind of shared overall was that SharePoint does encourage collaboration, engagement, and communication, which are a substantial part of the culture of an organization. And then if a strategy is not produced by an entire organization and those at top, there can be miscommunications that affect the outcome of the implementation. So next we have a study by Diff, Kogan, and Fu in 2013. And this study was important in that it highlights the necessity to consider different political factors upon implementation. Obviously, sometimes that seems less important because you want to make it usable, but there can be times when political factors influence the outcomes of implementing a system like SharePoint. So this study studied the implementation of SharePoint at the University of Maryland University College. They found different opportunities with SharePoint is that it allowed for files to be stored in document libraries, and then it can act as a central hub for communications with its announcements, discussion, and blog tools. Also, SharePoint provided better processes in the functions of SharePoint, allowing the handling of documents and promoting better communication. It also improved the organizational culture. The launch of the system site created a sense of community among the team members. After finding the best practices and conventions for the system, making sure that the facility was involved in assigning functional areas, while still adhering to the initial agreed upon guidelines and conventions, they were able to successfully implement the SharePoint system. However, there were some challenges. One particularly was that the staff discovered that plans had changed and SharePoint would not continue to be supported by the university. They also had expressed that the staff had said they would not welcome another migration to a new system. Looking at this study as it relates to the Heritage House of Keller, I found that there were several dynamics involving issues with management and having to work with the corporate office. Since the Heritage House of Keller is one of 45 facilities across Texas that is managed by this office. So it would be important when implementing SharePoint to make sure that there are no political issues or issues with management that need to make for better communications with the corporate office, especially regarding the implementing of SharePoint. And the study found a better handling of documents, which is really needed at the Heritage House of Keller. I had already said that they used very minimal technology, and they have no practices regarding the handling of documents. Most is done with just pen and paper, and this can be extremely challenging due to the sensitive nature of documents that they do have and handle, because it is a facility that will have patient information. It's just very important to consider. And workers consistently share sensitive information across insecure platforms in the form of emailing and forwarding different sensitive information. Overall, this study helped to highlight the need for careful planning and best practices, which is even more critical for a cohesive outcome. The study also provided an essential component of any implementation of a system, that no matter how carefully or well-crafted or successful the system is, if there are political factors that aren't taken into consideration early on and management factors, that there can be issues in the long run. Proper planning and communication are also necessary before implementation to provide to ensure the project will have the opportunity to be successful. Also, that the functions of SharePoint surrounding the handling of documents and promoting better communication could prove especially useful for the Heritage House of Keller. Also, that they focused heavily on the implementation in the study and made sure to meet with the different departments to decide on how the team would proceed in the implementation process. I think that this could be a very useful guide in how things would go over well at the Heritage House of Keller. The study really dove into communication and meeting with all the different departments, and even though in the end there were political issues that halted the system, they were really happy with the outcome. Also, in another study done by Herrera in 2018, this study highlights the importance of leadership roles in implementing SharePoint, which can drastically influence the organizational culture. In this study, they examined the implementation of Microsoft SharePoint at the University of Mississippi. There's no participation from departments. This also helped to highlight when there's no participation from department heads in overseeing the project, there are better outcomes in how the system is accepted. So when department heads or managers are involved and excited about the process, in the end, it really does influence how the employees and the different users end up accepting it. So they found different opportunities for SharePoint was that in months after the implementation, the SharePoint site had become the de facto, and everyone seemed very happy with the changes. They also found unexpected benefits of having improved communication and collaboration within various departments. This would be very exciting for the Heritage House of Keller, as the departments are on totally different sides of the building, and it can be really hard to talk or collaborate on projects or get feedback. So that was an exciting opportunity. Also, implementing SharePoint had a drastic effect on the organizational culture, and they witnessed more communication of a personal nature, as users were sharing pictures of their family members and pets, and they saw that an entire community began to emerge. This is also an exciting opportunity, even though they hadn't necessarily believed it would happen. Improving the organizational culture through SharePoint is something that could definitely benefit the Heritage House of Keller. However, there were challenges. They found the most significant SharePoint problems had to do with the document library functions. That is a little of concern due to the fact that that is one of the main things that the Heritage House of Keller does need to improve. They also cited various issues with SharePoint's Microsoft-centric nature. This is just saying that just like any Microsoft documents can have issues in Word and Excel, SharePoint is not an exception. So there are going to be things that can happen just because of the fact that it is a Microsoft system. Okay, some more challenges were that there were issues surrounding the lack of support for various browsers outside of Internet Explorers. And then even though most SharePoint functions work correctly, but not all the time, and this is an issue for usability. In terms of the Heritage House of Keller, the model of implementation would prove to be valuable to consider, and having the department heads provide feedback on the platform initially could help increase the usability and help to bring the departments together. Overall, the study highlights essential processes surrounding leadership, culture, and saw a positive impact through the implementation of SharePoint. And that having department managers on board and helping to facilitate the implementation along the process can be crucial in fostering a better organizational culture and ease any resistance from other staff members. Also, that the implementation focuses on incorporating the management, which provided feedback that shaped the usability from the get-go. They also focused heavily on the implementation and made sure to meet with different departments to decide how to structure it and to get feedback. And like I said, I think this is going to be crucial in the Heritage House of Keller to ensure that there's the usability that they need. Okay, so a little bit more about the Heritage House of Keller. Like I said, I think also this model of implementation, considering where the company wants to be and reforming that architecture is important. And another thing to consider is that it might be best to use the UAT on the department heads just to get a feedback before this implementation begins, and then include different staff members throughout the building, which will help to make staff members feel more included in the process. Overall, in this article, the authors assert the smoothest migrations are typically with the ones with the most diligence has been placed into the migration itself. So this just means that the authors found that the organizations that put the most time into coming up with that strategy and that don't just dive into the project have more success on the end, and that auditing the content and inventory will help to drive a strategic plan based on the needs of the organization and can start the implementation slowly. And this is nice to not overwhelm the staff. The study stresses the need to consider strategy as it becomes necessary to see where the organization is versus where they would like to be eventually. And this should be done looking at different aspects, including management, culture, and of course, in the future of their knowledge management. The study also found that migrations that lacked a defined structure were considered failures since they lack any type of outlined governance plan, and they can often suffer from low adoption rates since the users can't find the type of data that they need. So when SharePoint has been done and it has been implemented in a way that didn't have structure, most of the time the usability wasn't there, and thus there were low adoption rates. The authors also outline the necessity of completing a test migration within a designated test environment, and that the importance of the role that technology, leadership, and management plays in implementation. They place a heavy emphasis on having the right strategy. In a study by Listingman and Hadley in 2016, they highlight the need to examine the resources a company has for the project and the usability of SharePoint and what the organization needs. So the study outlines how they created a knowledge database in SharePoint, even though they had limited resources, limited time, and they had a particular focus on a system that was user-friendly and functional. The opportunities showed that feedback from the initial UAT test, researchers allowed for the customization of the database to be similar to public search engines as requested. This helped to drive the usability of the system and would better meet the user requirements. Although there were challenges presented in the fact that initially the SharePoint was not meeting user requirements from a user perspective, and that the users felt the document libraries and their functioning were not appealing. And they also found that users were not able to use the search adequately to find what they were looking for, despite various training sessions. However, they did have multiple UAT tests, so they were allowed to get initial feedback and then build off of that. Looking at this through the Heritage House of Keller, the article stresses the importance to identify what funds or resources will be allotted, and that the implementation can be done with limited funds. It also stresses the time to take time to ensure the system would be accepted, as that's crucial to the desired results of SharePoint and will be one of the biggest challenges at the Heritage House of Keller. Overall, the study shows the importance of understanding the limitations placed on any implementation should always be considered in order to generate the most efficient and effective procedures. The article also highlights the need for a system to meet usability requirements, which will be the primary concern of Heritage House of Keller. The slow movement was influential in wanting to ensure that the system would not prove to be overwhelming, and thus negatively impact the current organizational processes and culture. The authors asserted that quality control was essential to ensure that the content within the database was of high standard, valuable, and useful to users, which meant to make sure that content was always up to date. And another thing is that this study had multiple tests. At the beginning, they started with one group, and then as they felt it was meeting the requirements of that group, they moved on to test with a different group. By doing this, and doing this slowly, it allowed for the evolution of the system that was meeting the user requirements and that was getting better as they introduced it to more groups, which had a large portion of their success. Here's some conclusion and final thoughts. So obviously, I feel that SharePoint is a useful knowledge management tool that is extremely advantageous to any organization looking to improve business practices and foster a better knowledge infrastructure. SharePoint is also a cost-efficient platform, and it still provides a flexible, customizable, and a scalable framework. This can prove to be useful to any organization by facilitating better communication and collaboration within the building. As seen in various studies, it would be crucial, especially for the Heritage House of Keller, to create a user acceptance testing. This ensures proper feedback happens throughout the implementation and constantly can take in consideration usability, what people would like to see in the system, and if it's working. A lot of the studies that I looked at constantly used it, and the ones that use it the most and use it continuously had the most success in the end. Also, it's going to be necessary to recognize current management practices to ensure that those in significant leadership roles support the process. This means if you have a manager that is not on board with SharePoint or getting it into their building, the odds of success are significantly lower than a manager that is looking to embrace that and is willing to grow, and especially wants to grow the knowledge infrastructure. However, there can be management practices that you can put into place to counteract that, along with different training and strategies. So that doesn't mean that if you don't necessarily have the best manager that you shouldn't look at SharePoint. Also, in the end, some important factors that I saw throughout all the studies was creating a strategy that aligns with the corporate office. So there should be a strategy that is specific and considered for a while, just to make sure that the needs of the organization are met. And this is going to have to align with the corporate offices and the corporate goals. As seen as in a study, if the organization does not work with the corporate location, like at the Heritage House of Keller, it's going to be hard to make sure that in the end, the system is used and it's there for a long time. Also, that ensuring the system meets the usability requirements of the facility. This is going to be huge, especially at the Heritage House of Keller, with demographics that are a little bit older and that are very hesitant to changes, and they already struggle using the little technology that they have. So this will be huge in making sure that the SharePoint, through its customization, meets their usability. If they don't feel like they can use the system, they might use it in the wrong way, or they won't use it at all. And that also examining the leadership and management to ensure that they are compliant in the process to drive the acceptance of change. Once again, it's an important factor to have leadership and to find people in the organization that do want to drive change and are positive. At the Heritage House of Keller, there are 7 department heads. About 5 or 6 of them are very enthusiastic people in general, and that could be huge in making sure to drive the acceptance of change and trying to make it not a negative process that involves more work, but something that will help the longevity of the company and make the practices within the building easier and more efficient. Also, the Heritage House of Keller has issues regarding the lack of strong management, a culture that resists change and begrudgingly works together, and also a lack of engagement with our corporate office and a staff that uses minimal technology. I've said this several times. All of these will be so important to take into consideration when coming up with strategies, when coming up with how to implement the system. And there can be things that happen, whether that's through training or different team bonding even, that can help in this process. And it also will be necessary to address these lapses before implementing SharePoint, just to ensure the long-term success. Having seen that the organizations that didn't consider like political factors, and then even got to the end of the system, and even though the system worked and the users were happy with it, they weren't on board with the corporate office, and they ended up having to not use the system anymore. It was eventually faded out. So it is important to look at every single aspect prior to implementing. And then in the end, no matter how incredible SharePoint is and how it can lead to collaboration and working together and streamlining processes, if the different dynamics of Heritage Keller aren't addressed and there aren't practices put into place to counteract that, it's going to be the most deciding factor in the system and how it's utilized in its business practices, or whether the implementation is rejected. So it is important to take into consideration, like I've said, different components. This page is the reference section. I have everything that I used, and they're all linked. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. And I hope that helped you a little bit with understanding SharePoint, and especially in the context of the Heritage House of Keller.